We are a game-playing animal. Whether it's cards, football, darts, a flutter on the GGs, or mindlessly obsessive game playing on your phone, all of us at some point play games. We can't help it. After all, it's part of our biological inheritance. Animals play games. The compulsions that drive these behaviours, the needs they satisfy, are well documented by neuroscience. But what happens when learning people try to tap into this gaming energy? Do they get it right? Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
Let me introduce my guest on The Learning Hack this time.
Is that Carol Baskin?
Cynical Bambino, what are you saying? That is so incredibly rude to our guest. She looks nothing like Carol Baskin.
She must be in disguise.
Have you taken your meds? Juliette Denny is Managing Director and Ideologist-in-chief of award-winning learning tech company Growth Engineering. Juliette's life mission is to eradicate dull online learning. It breaks my heart, she says, that something that should be so fun has all the qualities of a beige sock. Growth Engineering works to harness the power of that gaming energy for learning that isn't a beige sock, but which engages the deeply seated emotions in the limbic brain.
Watch out, people. They want to monkey with your limbic brain.
No, Cynical Bambino. It's a well-established technique in learning called gamification.
Game of for what?
Gamification. That's the name of the game. Gamification. That's the name of the game. Juliet has been an enthusiastic exponent of gamification, but lately it's come in for a lot of criticism. Do people just not do it right? Or is there something inherently flawed about the whole concept? I wanted to find out.
Let's kick off with the obligatory question on this podcast, which is, how did you get into learning technologies? I see you had quite a business background, business college, master's from Harvard. And how did you end up getting into learning tech?
So I came out of university and went into box software, so box software sales. And I was predominantly selling games, so, boxed Command and Conquer and things like that, before the dawn of time, before the dawn of the internet. And then I did my postgrad, as you said, at Harvard. And while I was over in the US, I worked for a company called Fairmarket, which was later bought by eBay. And that was the first sort of foray into the .com market. And so when we came back from the US after our postgrads, I decided at that point that I really wanted to build my own sort of technology company. And I wanted it to be, in the internet. So I'm obviously not a technologist by background. So started off doing sales consultancy for venture companies and the banks to do sales audits on their commercial functions. And the idea was that if they were going to put more money in, they would need to know whether they were going to hit the sales targets. And so my role was to go into these early stage technology companies that they had invested in and to help them understand whether they had the right commercial models for success. And through that, created or was able to secure a developer, and we started coding up an assessment tool. And so from that assessment tool, we ended up doing behavioral assessments and process assessments. And then we were doing the delivery of content. And before we knew it, we were in the LMS space. So that's really how I started. Or how Growth Engineering started.
Interesting. And over the last few years, I suppose your company has been very heavily associated with gamification. Now, gamification has come in for right kicking, I have to say, the last few years. If there's one trend in learning that a lot of people I talk to want to rubbish, it is gamification. So do you want to go into bat for that? Have you changed your attitude to you? What's your response to those who say that gamification is lipstick on a pig, it's superficial, it doesn't really do learning any service and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when, as I say, my background and our entry to learning technology is very dominated by salespeople, commercial excellence, that kind of thing. And very quickly we realized that salespeople don't really like e-learning. And we still find that today. If you ask people to, learn, product information or sales skills online, they're very, very, reticent to do it. They would much prefer to, get coaching by their managers or whatever. However, we also know that salespeople are very, they can be competitive, and they're used to a kind of leaderboard gamification environment. And so for us, we were kind of born into the learning world with a kind of solid recognition that gamification for our target market at the time worked very well. And so, what I would say to, everybody, the world, in terms of gamification is that gamification, it's all about, the lens in which you see it and how you use it. You can't say it doesn't work or it does work. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does work. It's just a question of how you use it. What I have found, or our experience over the years, is that gamification gets more exciting the more layers you put onto it. So one of the analogies that I use is, you can play tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses for a finite amount of time, maybe sort of 5 minutes, but then after that you get a bit bored. However, if you're talking about something like Monopoly or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, you can play that for hours and hours and hours. And gamification is the same. The more gamified layers you can put onto it, the more interested it becomes. The other thing is that you can't use gamification on its own. So that's kind of like saying, how interested would I be, playing a game on my own, for a period of time? It's just more interesting when it's done socially. So we're big advocates of saying, the way to get social really humming is to put gamification around it, because people like reward and recognition. So yeah, it's not a one size fits all. Am I going to say all examples of gamification are really great? No, I'm not. I'm going to say gamification has its place, and when done right, it's extremely powerful. Our engagement rates on our platform are significantly more than many other providers, but that's because we're passionate about gamification, but only gamification with social. That's the way we see it working.
So you're talking there about kind of levels of gamification. Are we slipping across a kind of borderline in topic terms between gamification, which is kind of applying certain games attributes to an interface, like leaderboards and star ratings and so on, or what sometimes people call serious games or games with purpose or whatever, which is actually having a learning game? It's how do you divide that up, or don't you? Would you say gamification covers the whole of that spectrum, or?
No, I mean, gamification, the way I would define it is very much gamification is the application of game mechanics to a process or set of processes. Whereas serious games is much more about an immersive, much more like Minecraft. So it's game first and then it's learning. And when it's done really beautifully, like Minecraft, it is perfection, because kids don't even notice that they're learning about physics and all of those great things that are on Minecraft. Gamification is very different. It is literally applying a set of mechanics to linear processes in order to encourage and engage people to deepen their engagement with the content or the social environment that they're operating in.
So let's drill down more into that idea of mechanics and game mechanics, but at the same time, maybe take this broader lens, looking at the whole area of kind of games and learning. And it's well documented, I think, ever since the Prensky book. It's quite a while ago now. It's been a feature of the landscape. I'm looking at that topic area. How would you make use of gaming psychology in learning, and what constraints do you think we might need to place on that? Stimulating dopamine loops might give you a very sticky learning experience, but for an average head of L&D, they're not going to want to encourage addictive behaviors. I've heard that as problem and pushback. So, I mean, there's a couple of questions there for you if you'd like to kind of tick those off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, where we tend to use gamification is really to reinforce the sort of latter elements of Bloom's psychology. So a lot of learning platforms really focus on the first sort of two levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where you're trying to deliver out the learning and then you're trying to test them whether they actually understand it. Where we tend to use gamification and gaming mechanics is much more to stimulate the social community, so that people are sort of questioning the topic. They are sharing how they've applied the topic. They are posing problems as to, the experiences they're having in that knowledge area. They are getting rewarded for delivering back advice. They are rating. So let's say you're using it in a sales context. Again, you might have a situation where people are delivering, pitches, and people are rating and appraising those pitches, and then finally getting people to build on that knowledge. So we're trying to get individuals to be passionate advocates for that new set of behavior. So whether that's health and safety, or whether that's a new sales technique, or whether that's just a set of values that the organization wants to embed, ultimately what we're trying to do is not necessarily turn the subject matter into a game. What we're trying to do is use the gaming mechanics to embed the change, because ultimately L&D departments are not going to get their return on investment unless the behavior change actually kicks in. And I think also the other thing is that is really, really important is the new generation of learners coming through really want a many-to-many kind of collaborative environment. What they want is they want to show how they are, really being able to help that company, move forward and deliver on their vision and values. They want to be seen as a valued piece in the machine. And so the only way to do that is to, give them a voice. And we also note that, individuals tend to respect subject matter experts from that, learning area within the business, rather than a centralized L&D function. So, our goal in sort of using that stickiness is to appeal to, what we are, the almost like the limbic brain within, the human state, to say, right, well, can we foster a sense of belonging within our learning technology stack? Can we, create passionate advocates for a new way of working? Can we, it's much more in and around that, so that people are choosing on a daily basis to be part of a learning environment, because we know companies that have got, high levels of engagement in their learning, can innovate faster, can grow quicker, can be more efficient, more effective. They can serve their customers better. So ultimately, it's about spearheading that learning environment more than turning content into a game.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that you apply gaming, perhaps the more social aspect of online gaming, rather than the person interacting with the system and being driven to kind of compulsive and addictive behaviors, which is sort of the whole area of gaming that people find scary and challenging. I think in HR and learning.
What we're trying to do is we are trying to tap into the limbic brain rather than the sort of neocortex. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get.
Sorry, can you explain what the limbic brain very quickly? What the limbic brain does as opposed to the cortex?
Yes, the limbic brain is all about is all about the way we feel about things. So it's all about it's it's the things that we can't stop feeling, basically. So it's things like love, competition, collaboration, the need for belonging. It's all of those kind of things. And most learning appeals to a neocortex level of so we have to do health and safety because it's what we're required to do, which doesn't really inspire us to do something. Whereas what we're trying to do is we're trying to put processes in and around the learning environment that make people want to be part of that community through adding things like what we call epic meaning. So one of the things that we found is really, really does drive a sense of passion for the learning community is actually naming the learning platform or the learning campaign in line with the organization's vision and values. So, for example, we were doing, this is a very easy example, is we're doing some work for the World Health Organization, and they're trying to save 3 billion lives. So their platform and their app is called My Billion. And every time you log in and you're part of that learning community, taking learning, passing on learning, sharing learning, collaborating with case studies, uploading, your views on X, Y, Z, videoing stuff. All of that gives you, XP and rewards you for sharing that information. And of course, if you're in the front line, the more you can share information from the front line and the more you can be an advocate for a new way of working, whether it's, washing your hands or whatever, as simple as it is, the more that's going to cascade out. The heroes are the people that are kind of operating on the front line. So, just calling it My Billions rather than, XYZ LMS brings a whole different way of thinking and feeling about that environment. Suddenly it's about you and it's about your commitment and wanting to drive that behavior in order to deliver the mission of the company.
As a marketing person, I know that just a simple rebrand and renaming like that doesn't necessarily attach it to deep emotions in people's minds. It has to go a bit further than that. So when you talk about the limbic brain, how within the kind of context of the learning, how do you make that connection using psychology? Or what's your approach to applying those other psychological techniques to do that?
I mean, really for us, it's about, first of all, it's where the company wants to go. So rather than looking at the individual, we're looking at the company and we're saying, right, well, why have people chosen to come and work for a company, like you? What are you trying to do? What change are you trying to make? And then it's about taking whatever that brand stands for. So, let's say we're talking about L'Oreal, for example. People choose to come to work for that company because, they make the world a more beautiful place. So how does the learning environment need to map onto that? And what when we think about L'Oreal as a brand, do we need to have in that learning environment which will appeal to the learners? Well, for a start, it needs to look absolutely stunning. It needs to, behave in a way that, people identify immediately with the brand, so that every time they log into that particular environment, they are reminded of why they're, working for that organization, just in the same way as they were for the World Health Organization. And then what we do is every time they come into that learning environment, we reward them for the time that they spend there. It might start off in a very sort of slow way. So, when we're putting in a new, environment, it might be you're rewarded for your first login, you're rewarded for uploading your profile photo, you're rewarded for putting your bio in, you then are rewarded for the first time you comment, the first time you upload a video, the first time and then of course, as you that feeling of I've done a good job, I'm being rewarded for the time that I'm spending in this environment, the more you want to be in that environment.
I've worked with a lot of companies in learning technologies, but there are none I would recommend as wholeheartedly as Learning Pool. They have some of the most leading-edge, award-winning tech around, but also an approachable, honest style that means they're equally at home helping people take their first steps in digital learning. They're great with organisations small and large. They do platform, content, authoring, analytics and more, and have a 98% customer satisfaction rating. So if you have a problem to solve or an opportunity you need a can-do partner to help you make the most of, go to learningpool.com.
The way we approach it is different from a lot of learning providers, which is more, you have to be in this learning environment because you need to learn this. What we're saying is that we really need you as part of this learning environment in order to, create the company that we want and impact the world in the way that we want.
So it's attaching it to purpose and values and the brand.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And also making heroes of those people that really do act as advocates for the community. So typically what we will do is we will start off with a very, very light touch delivery of content. And we've even had, we did a project for HP where they had a large, learning management platform. They spend a lot of money on large pieces of e-learning, but the learning population wouldn't go on to the LMS to do the content. So we said, well, look, let's approach it from a different way. Let's basically say we're going to put them in a series of battles, head-to-head battles. So started off where it's just 5 quick questions. And, that was individual against individual, and then it was country against country. And even though they hadn't taken the learning, what would happen is that the questions would pop up on their mobile phone, and then they'd be like, right, I don't know the answer. I need to go and find the information. So they would find that information from the marketing materials or whatever it was. And then, so that information was reinforced. It didn't even need to be delivered via e-learning. It was just automatically reinforced. They got the information from elsewhere. And then that culminated in those people that, did the most battles and scored the best on all of the questions. They basically were advocates for a specific subject. And so, if you prove yourself to be, if you battle your way to the top of the leaderboard, or, show yourself to have more knowledge than anybody else, you were then in charge of, a forum or a group for a period of time. So just a slightly different way of doing it. And because it's not a one-to-many approach, because it's not coming down from L&D to, individuals, it's individual to individual, the take-up is a lot more. I mean, we launched with a customer in the Far East last week, and they had 3,500 people on the platform, and they had 500,000 battle questions. I mean, it's just an insane amount of engagement, and ultimately that engagement does feed into the topic or subject area being embedded. It's just a different way of approaching it.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked about brain science as being an influence in what you do. What other applications of neuroscience and or psychology do you see as useful? And what sort of applications of those principles and insights are you making at Growth Engineering? I've started you off in gamification, but obviously you do other bits of stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other areas that we look at in a quite significant way is new learners coming through into the learning environment really want a different relationship with learning than let's say our generation did. And so we lean on things like self-determination theory and really trying to make heroes out of individuals as well. I would say that's one massive thing that we tend to focus quite a lot of. So first of all, how do we get people to feel confident in sharing their information? So that competency is very much about, first of all, giving them confidence when they first come into the platform, but also ongoing after that to continue to reward their curiosity. So one of the things that we're challenged by as an organization is that when people join an organization, they are passionate about that organization. They want to build their career within that organization, and they are curious to understand how they can add value to that organization. So, if curiosity is innate, surely the L&D department should be core to curating that curiosity. But unfortunately, it doesn't It doesn't work like that in a lot of L&D departments. So, what models, can we draw upon? And, one model that we do draw upon, a lot is self-determination theory. This idea that, first of all, in order to get people to be continually curious about a subject, they need to feel competent in it. They need to feel confident in sharing it. There needs to be a community that they can basically explore ideas, and they can relate those ideas to the environment they're in, to the cohort that they work in. But then also the fact that they can build on that and show what they've actually done with that knowledge. So the kind of autonomy level as well is very important. So you can see from what I'm saying that the gamification really exists to embed the learning and to inspire the curiosity, but the gamification in itself doesn't, it's not the whole answer. It is about looking at different types of motivational theory and saying, well, how are we going to understand how we create a curious workforce? Because if we can do that and we can channel that curiosity around our vision, values, and mission, then we're ultimately going to win out.
Talking about learning theory leads us on to my next question. Thank you very much for a good link there, which is that where do you stand in the theory wars? Now, you mentioned Bloom and you mentioned self-determined theory. There's a lot of learning theory about. Not all of it's useful. Some of it's snake oil.
Yep.
Some of it's plain wrong. Some of it, we've heard a lot of this about the various Ponzi schemes that pertain in learning theory. No one seems to agree on who and what we should follow. There's a lot of dispute in this area, a lot of denunciations and so on. And it's kind of tricky for people like me, because as soon as you mention something like the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, suddenly, somebody else is taking a pop at that. But certain people, I feel, I felt talking to on this podcast, they have a particular stance on it. There are particular people that they will mention again and again and say, well, this area of it seems to be pretty sound. And is there a particular school for you, or an era, or a group of ideas, or particular theorists that you return to?
I mean, for me, and this is just personally speaking, it is all about the audience. So, we might have a slightly different approach if we're dealing with people that are, let's say, partners in a law firm. Okay, mm-hmm. We might look at different things with regards to how we would inspire that community with learning theories versus, let's say, a cohort of new graduates.
Okay.
So one of the things that we know about, let's say, trying to inspire partners from a law firm is that they need competition, but they also need a huge amount of encouragement. So what we would have to do in order to get them online, because they're not necessarily confident, and there's also barriers to entry in terms of, sharing their expertise, because, there might be learnings with regards to, I'm sharing my expertise, and so therefore I won't be valued as much. So there might be structures within the gamification strategy and the social strategy we might have to be a bit more gentle with. Whereas if we were doing something in and around, graduate cohort, we would probably just throw them in and there'd be a bit more of a bum fight. Yeah. Right. So I think it's not so much which theories do I rate and which theories do I not rate. It's what theories are going to work best for the audience.
So it's more situational. So it might be like, I'm dealing with lawyers. I can apply the insights, or I don't know. There might be a particular theorist that's good for that. Or I'm dealing with marketing people. The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is a big factor because they're great at forgetting what they did in the last campaign. Or, I'm making a poor joke there. But is that how you think of it?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I think it also depends on the subject. So let's say we're talking about money laundering. Okay. Or maybe that's actually not a very good example. So forgetting curve is I mean, it is rife with, is it true or is it not true? I mean, obviously the particular series and the way Ebbinghaus originally identified the forgetting curve is obviously fraught with questions anyway. However, on an individual basis, I think we can all agree that the majority of detail that we take in, let's say today, we're not necessarily going to, remember in, a week or 10 days. However, I think that the forgetting curve becomes more important when potentially you can't put what I would say is sort of epic meaning, narrative, in and around a story. So something like, for example, washing your hands or something very similar just could require, daily, hourly, whatever, jolts. So, that could just be notifications coming through, when was the last time you washed your hands or whatever
Nudges,
it might be.
yeah.
Yeah, just, nudges as opposed to something more, significant, like when you are, operating a value-based sales model, can you upload a video of you showing how you might do that? That potentially doesn't need a nudge. It needs a lot of forethought, and it needs, potentially, a good understanding of Bloom's taxonomy. It needs a good understanding of, a self-determination theory. It needs a good understanding. I think it's horses for courses. It's both the audience, and it's actually, the subject matter. And it's also, to a certain extent, just to add even more complexity, it's also about the actual organization itself. So we've worked with some organizations that, absolutely love the idea of gamification. They might be a bit reticent to start off with, but then as soon as you get it into the actual population, and we've found this particularly true in Asia, and that's only for the companies that we're working with, but, we have found that they absolutely love, the gaming mechanics, the peer-to-peer battles, the battle squads, all of that kind of stuff. It just goes crazy. However, for some organizations, that's just not where they want to start. And that's not how they want the experience to be. So it's also about really understanding, it's about understanding what the campaign is and what you're going to start, where you're going to start the working relationship, with a client. So what campaign, what the problem they're trying to solve, what the organization culture is like, what the audience is like. And then, with all of that, pulling together something that works for, to the best of your knowledge as it stands now, and agreeing that with the client and saying, how does this feel? And in order to get the results. I mean, ultimately, for us, it is very much about making that all important impact. We want to make a lasting impact for that organization, and we want to help them achieve their, organizational goals. And so it's not just about buying a piece of technology. It's also about applying the processes that are embedded within that technology to maximize the outcomes and get that return on investment. Because unfortunately, we are in an industry where, return on investment has been defined by, I'm just going to take cost out. That's not the ROI. The ROI should be the impact on people's behavior within your organization, and whether they are behaving in more efficiently and more effectively and are acting in a more passionate way about what your goals are, and driving your business forward.
How is the pandemic crisis treating you at the moment? And what do you think the effects are that it's having on learning technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry, how it will shake out, I don't know. But what I would say is that, learning technologies has always had a couple of, very large players at the top, and it's had, lots of very small players at the bottom. And I think what we will see is a sort of, growing sort of, polarization of that, where, small companies just simply won't be able to, compete against some of the, the larger companies because they aren't funded or they don't have the critical mass to basically market and sell. I think the other interesting thing and something that we will see more of is that is this idea that you might have a talent suite in the middle, but the front end touch points aren't good enough for the learners to engage them. So although you might stick with your talent suite, in order to actually drive engagement and to drive return on investment from the training spend, organizations will be choosing different front end solutions to target different problems. So I would say that that will certainly continue, because the reality is that learners live in the consumer world, and a lot of the big sort of talent suites and established learning technologies players are just too big to innovate really, really quickly. And so there will be a need for this sort of almost satellite industry running in and around them in order to facilitate that consumer feel for the learners, because the learners will continue to demand what they see in their consumer life in order to be engaged ongoing. They just simply, there will come a point where they just and to be honest with you, we've been seeing this over the last sort of 7 years. People are just refusing to go online and do big chunks of e-learning. It's just boring and they just don't want to do it. When I'm speaking in conferences, and one of the questions I always ask is, how many of you love your e-learning? And it's just like, no hands go up. That we need to find a way of delighting, exciting, and making the learners passionate about what they do. And clearly they're passionate about the consumer technology they use in their everyday lives. So how do we get learning technologies to act a bit more like that? But taking into account that large organizations cannot be swapping in and out their LMSs and talent suites on an annual basis. That's just not
With all of that in mind, as we start to look forward to getting back to something like normal, don't want to use the horrible cliche, the new normal, what do you feel we should be focusing on for the future of learning as we come into this? What developments are you most excited about and kind of itching to get working on when things make the environment is such that it makes it easier to look ahead and towards innovation than perhaps it is at the moment?
I mean, our focus is very much on trying to get a higher level of engagement with learners. So that's very much so. The ultimate goal is really to create a many-to-many environment which inspires learning as a sort of daily activity. So with that in mind, the kind of things that we think are exciting are things like AR, not so much VR, but certainly AR. So using the idea of surprise and delight, almost like treasure hunts and stuff like that, to get people excited on a daily basis about finding new information and again sharing new information. So for us, it's not necessarily technology is a byproduct of what we're trying to do. We ultimately believe that, companies that have the most vibrant learning culture will be the companies that ultimately win out. And so it comes back to us for what technology can we build that is going to, maintain that curiosity for the individual and for the company. And so, AR is one of those things that we're looking at the moment, and also big data and how we can use big data to ensure that people get the information that they have been looking for, so that it makes their investigation into that area of knowledge easier and frictionless. And the other thing that we're continually looking at is the idea that it's a relationship which is facilitated by technology. So for us, simple things like notifications will continue to be important. Which notifications, when do we use notifications? How do we use notifications in order to drive the right kind of behavior and not make people exhausted? And then, I think, finally, an area that we're always looking into is this idea of, epic meaning, bringing, trying to make it ever closer. Why an individual's joined an organization, and what is the purpose of that organization, and how do we keep driving those two processes together to ensure that the individual stays interested in their career, and interested and passionate about what the company is trying to achieve. And that does take a kind of talent suite approach, all the way through from, learning to, KPIs to organizational objectives. It's about really understanding where your career fits and the organization is trying to go, and ensuring that, you've got true visibility, of how those two things combine, in a way that, motivates you to keep going, and makes you the most efficient that you can for that organization. So yeah, a lot, but it's not necessarily technology. Technology is a byproduct, is what is produced after, you understand, what you're trying to do.
Juliette Denny, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting conversation. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Juliette and to our sponsors, Learning Pool. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to get future episodes automatically. And if you're keen to help other people find us as well, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. If you want to contact me about anything at all, you can get me through @JohnHelmer on Twitter, or through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com. Next time on The Learning Hack, my guest will be David Wilson of Fosway. We'll be discussing Fosway's research about how the industry is faring in lockdown and what's happening in the learning systems market.
Now I finally get it.
Bye for now.
A beautiful day beyond your rather nice looking curtains there. So what's the rest of the day hold for you?
Well, contract negotiations.
Oh.
The usual. This is probably the highlight of my day.